This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Director Denis Villeneuve sat down with Variety for an interview in early September 2016, just days before his first sci-fi film Arrival had released to theaters. This was a stark contrast to the work he'd done in the past, which was completely different genres in films like Sicario and Prisoners. I'm always looking for sci-fi material, and it's difficult to find original and strong material that's not just about weaponry, Denis said. A long-standing dream of mine is to adapt Dune, but it's a long process to get the rights, and I don't think it will succeed. The interviewer pushed a bit more into that thought, asking, why did you suddenly now decide to turn away from grounded budget dramas to the harder and more expensive world of sci-fi? He sat and contemplated that question for a moment before saying, I didn't turn to science fiction, I went away from it. Villeneuve's interest in sci-fi goes back to a very young age. He was influenced by the interests of his father, a frequent reader of technology and science magazines, and he was exposed to the influences of the nuclear age. Quite literally, he lived near a power plant, which he could see from his kitchen window, saying, I was raised in the atomic age where the big fear of the time was not the climate, but the atomic bomb. And to know that you had that power just a few kilometers from home, I think it's something that sparked a lot of imagination. You eat your cereal in the morning and you look at the nuclear power plant. Cinematically, he cited Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Ridley Scott's Blade Runner as sci-fi favorites, leaving him with an early vivid picture of what future worlds and strange technologies could look like. But when he grew up and began a directorial career of his own, Villeneuve didn't touch the genre, with the first 17 years of his filmography consisting mostly of dramas and short films. But he still had sci-fi on his mind even then, later explaining that in that time he just hadn't found a script he was happy with, saying in an interview with Deadline, "It's been 30 years I wanted to shoot science fiction, but I never found the right thing."
When I started to work in Hollywood, people were asking me, what would you like to do next? And I always answer sci-fi because it was the obvious thing that I could not make at home, and I was dreaming to do sci-fi since I was a teenager.
Yet as a young filmmaker, he just would not be able to secure the funds needed to make a science fiction film. Even so, he was still taking notes, adding new sci-fi favorites to his list: Children of Men by Alfonso Cuarón, Christopher Nolan's Inception, and Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin. And after a long wait, eventually, Villeneuve was ready for that right thing. In 1998, Villeneuve would release his first film, August 32nd, on Earth. This very same year, writer Ted Chiang had released a novella called Story of Your Life, a tale about alien beings with strange languages and a consciousness of the future. And it was a film that would inevitably lead Villeneuve back to science fiction. But first, he had some movies to make.
Communications are dead. Help is not coming. I said move! Run! Outside!
Mama.
Every day! So forgive me for not going home to have a good night's rest!
As he was midway working through his rather dark film Prisoners in 2012, Dan Levine and Dan Cohen of the 21 Laps production company approached him about directing and adapting Ted Chiang's book. And it was a story and an entry to sci-fi that Villeneuve couldn't resist. Once Prisoners and his next film, 2015 Sicario, were out of the way, he took up the project. Due to the modifications the screenplay made to Chiang's original narrative, Villeneuve later renamed this film adaptation to Arrival. With the backing of Paramount prominent actress Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner, and a script Villeneuve described as seductive, the film was in a good place, with Villeneuve simply saying everyone was really enthusiastic. And the optimism around the Arrival project ultimately paid off, with the film pulling in over $200 million at the box office against a $47 million budget, and earning positive scores from audiences and critics alike. After an incredibly long wait, Villeneuve finally broke into the genre at the forefront of his mind. But though this film was completed, Villeneuve didn't know how he felt about the new film.
Oh, you know, when you make a film, usually you have like at least a few days to recover and to think about the experience you just went through. And with Arrival, I didn't have any time to digest. I just went straight on another movie, and that is not good.
This is not a process I recommend. It's painful to do that. I have to be in two places at the same time. It's very tough. And it was about to get tougher for him, because the film he was already in prep for during Arrival was just a step deeper into sci-fi lore. And it was something that would help him prepare for his future film, Dune. Just like our sponsor Squarespace helps to prepare you to make a great first impression. Unlike the computerless world of Dune, Squarespace's Fluid Engine allows easy customization. Just click, drag, and drop assets wherever you want. None of that crazy coding that just never seems to work is ever needed. You can also choose from a variety of beautiful template designs or create your own, with the ability to make beautiful galleries and create an easy-to-use appointment system for your clients to book you for projects. Squarespace makes it so easy to customize and create a professional and stunning site that even the space worms could do it. So head over to squarespace.com/framevoyager to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code Voyager. The production company Alcon Entertainment, which Villeneuve had collaborated with on Prisoners, had bought the rights to the Blade Runner IP and were in the process of putting together a sequel, but they needed a director. Originally, Ridley Scott had signed up to return for the film, but he ended up pulling out to work on another iconic IP of his, Alien, with the production of Alien Covenant. So the director's chair was empty, and Alcon looked to Villeneuve to fill it.
In a very strange secret meeting where Andrew Kosovo, one of the Alcon producer, asked to meet me in a place where nobody could recognize us, in New Mexico, where and he said it's very important. Andrew came in a small cafe and he sat in front of me and put an envelope, and on his envelope it was written a one word, which was Queensboro. And he looked at me in the eyes, he said, Queensboro doesn't exist. That's the Blade Runner project. And that my heart skipped a beat.
With the original Blade Runner being one of Villeneuve's favorite films and an inspiration for his work, and a follow-up being an opportunity for him to continue his foray into the sci-fi genre, this ask might seem like a dream come true for Villeneuve, but he didn't necessarily see it that way, being intimidated by the legacy he was being called to continue.
I don't want someone else to this up. It's like a suicidal mission, you know, it's like super risky. Everybody will hate me. I can be banned from the cinematic community for the rest of my life, but it's worth the risk artistically.
He went on to call the idea of Blade Runner sequel a bit berserk of a risk, saying it feels like you are flirting with disaster every morning. But he was also beaming with enthusiasm, saying, I've never been this inspired. Despite his anxieties, he would take the plunge, feeling moved by the trust Alcove was placing in him to bring Blade Runner into a new era. Villeneuve was keen to stay loyal to the setting of the original film, preserving the references to companies and countries long gone in our world, the predicted technology that hasn't come to pass, that iconic retro-futuristic look of titanic megacities and skyscrapers surrounded by decay. The first Blade Runner was a dated 1980s vision of what 2019 could look like, and Villeneuve wanted to replicate its unreliable predictions to create his vision of the year 2049.
The first movie, again, is a landmark, aesthetic landmark in film history. And so we had to relate the main qualities of that movie, and then at the same time, I had to find our own identity of this new movie.
When the film finally released, Villeneuve was in awe at the positive response he got from critics, saying he felt he had been blessed by the gods of cinema, and deeply loved the fact that they felt it had been respectful of the first film. Villeneuve said that the film had taught him to communicate his vision to thousands of people working on it, getting over a past feeling of being naive and learning how to fight what he called a little war. However, while Villeneuve had learned this creative confidence from the experience of making the new Blade Runner, earning a sense that he had done one of his all-time cinema favorites justice, the film was running into a big problem, a snag at the box office. The film had made around $260 million through its screenings on a budget of $150 million. Seemingly a solid result on paper, but a general rule of thumb for films is to multiply the production budget by 2 to 2.5 to get the full cost of the film, including marketing and other elements not covered in a production budget. Needless to say, Alcon was in dire straits, with producer Andrew Cosgrove saying that the company had a substantial balance sheet. High-profile failures like an unpopular attempt to remake the film Point Break had left the company staking everything on this new Blade Runner. With a figure of around $400 million being floated as the mark for success, Villeneuve speculated that this was because of action-oriented marketing clashing with the art house, anti-blockbuster nature of the film, but settled for the fact that his job was to make movies, not sell them. The moment filmmakers start trying to control the financial outcomes of their film, it's the end of cinema. I can't predict whether a movie will be a success at the box office or not. People think it's a science, but it's art. You never know what will connect with people. I was just talking with Emma Thomas, the producer of Dunkirk, and they thought it would tank, but it was a success. These things are tough to call. He also noted that despite the financial mess his film had made, his reputation wasn't much worse for wear, saying that the truth is, I've had more offers than ever. This proved that I'm able to work in that range. However, beneath this confidence in his work and his role, he did hint at an underlying anxiety over the film's results, admitting, I can't permit myself to make 3 films like this. Films are expensive, and since it's my first time, it's allowed because the film was very well received, but I can't do that every time.
The miracle for me about Blade Runner 2049 is that I'm still making movies and you are still talking to me. I knew that when I did this movie, I flirted with disaster. I put myself into massive artistic danger. That was like walking, as Christopher Nolan said to me once, you're walking in sacred territory, man. It's true. It's like a sacrilegious what I did. You don't do that.
With that lucky escape from directorial oblivion and the second chance to work with, Villeneuve decided to continue his sci-fi saga with an adaptation of Dune. Dune was a tall order, maybe even taller than Blade Runner, a narrative that many tried and failed to adapt, as we've discussed before in our video on Jodorowsky's Dune, with only one director of several pulling it off before, David Lynch, in a retelling that many, including Lynch himself, found to be lacking. It's a story of incredible complexity and length, and realizing it would require Villeneuve to make use of all of his learning experiences up to that point. Villeneuve reflected on this by saying, all of my filmography has been built like bricks. I'm thinking projects that are more and more technically complex and bigger challenges. I would not dare to say that they were rehearsals, but definitely I was able to do Dune because I did Blade Runner, crediting Blade Runner for his understanding of world building and VFX. The Dune book is something that Villeneuve has cited as another of his early influences as a filmmaker, alongside the favorite films and the power plant at his window. This story was one he said he had read specifically at the moment when he was starting to dream big about cinema.
I started to dream about cinema at the age of 13 or 14 years old, and that when I read Dune, in fact, in the same period of time, but it's just that it's like there was something, I got more and more interested about the job of a director at a very young age. I think it has to do with storytelling at the time.
He described the experience as one of my big dreams. If you had said to me, ultimately, what would you like to do as a filmmaker? I would have said Dune. When I landed in Hollywood and people were asking me, what would be your dream? It's always those 4 letters that were coming out of my mouth. And even more so than Blade Runner, Villeneuve was determined to get this right. In a first for his career, he took up a trinity of roles: the director's chair, the writer's room, and the production suite. He put himself front and center with Dune, taking on the monumental tasks of adapting Frank Herbert's nearly 900 pages into something that could plausibly fit into a watchable runtime. And he wanted to do this while still being loyal to Herbert's vision.
When you adapt, you kill darlings. When you adapt, you transform. It's like, I think that the movie says more about me than about Frank Herbert. I mean, it's like, it's definitely, when you adapt, you have to necessarily bring your whole sensibility. I had the chance to know that Frank Herbert felt that this book, Dune, was misperceived, that he felt that people wrongly thought that Paul was a hero. So knowing this, I knew that I will orient the adaptation toward Frank Herbert's initial intentions, and it helped me tremendously to find my way into the book.
2 previous attempts at Dune we're familiar with, the unreleased Jodorowsky's Dune and the finished David Lynch's Dune. Both of these films failed to match that goal. Lynch's Dune was committed to the story but compromised the length due to studio cuts, while Jodorowsky's Dune was committed to the length but not the story, with Jodorowsky adopting a mentality less like death of the author and more like killing the author.
I was Frank Herbert, you know, like this, but with love,
twisting Herbert's narrative to his own bizarre design. Rather than follow in their footsteps, Villeneuve took a third option. He would be loyal to both length and narrative, and he would do it by dividing the format. His Dune would not be one film, it would be two. Villeneuve described this as the first liberty that I took, to make what he wanted to be a closer adaptation, saying Dune is all about details. It's so sophisticated, and there are so many rich cultures that are described. There's enough substance to make tons of movies. There's so many things that I needed to approach, to describe, to shoot, and to bring to the screen that I thought it would definitely need a minimum of 2 movies. I just skimmed the surface of some of the ideas that will be approached deeper in the second movie. I need to find the equilibrium between both movies, so the first one is just like opening the door on a world. This intense undertaking meant that it took years to go from Villeneuve's initial commitment to the film to the actual beginnings of principal photography for the first half of the Dune adaptation, January 2017 to March 2019, with the release planned for November 2020, later shifted to December. But of course, when we enter the 2020s and our timeline, we know what happens. Like the rest of the industry, the Dune production was thrashed by the COVID pandemic, causing its release date to receive a push all the way to October 2021. However, Villeneuve, interestingly, seemed to regard this as a blessing more than a curse, saying that it gave him time to make sure everything was perfect, that it reached the quality that I was looking for, making the process of refining the film into a grounded walk rather than like a race, forcing the crew to do little things a bit differently, with more time to experiment. And ultimately, it paid off. Dune achieved the numbers Blade Runner 2049 dreamed of, the coveted 400 million mark, raising $402 million on approximately $160 million movie budget. Despite some rockiness caused by the film's inclusion in a controversial HBO Max deal that undermined theatrical runs, causing tensions between distributor Warner Brothers and producer Legendary Pictures, the film was a resounding success. Sci-fi's Prodigal Son was getting his time on the sun, and the road to Dune Part 2 was being paved, a dream fulfilled. The resounding success of the first part meant that the sequel was greenlit almost immediately. This film will be the culmination of a journey its director's been on for 30 years. The journey of finally getting to explore his dream genre, the genre at the forefront of his imagination since childhood. Villeneuve intended his Dune to be a coming-of-age story, but maybe in a way, this journey is his story too. The wild imagination of his younger self made manifest from a small green village in Canada to the yellowy deserts of Arrakis. A journey of imagination, creativity, and commitment. But a film that is not out there for everyone else to see, Jodorowsky's Abandoned Dune, that was reported to have been maybe about 14 hours or maybe 20 hours, or I don't know, you have to take a look at the video because it is probably one of the most insane stories we've covered.